Hey everyone, today I am joined by Amir Rawdat. Amir is actually a solutions engineer with F5, but he focuses on modern applications, and he's also the author of a book, Managing Kubernetes Traffic with F5 NGINX, a practical guide. This is a really comprehensive book, so I wanted to bring attention to this, get this in front of folks. There's a lot of great information on there, so we're going to chat about that today. Amir, thanks for joining me today. Can you give a little bit of a background on yourself?
Sure. My name is Amir. I studied computer engineering in Ottawa and joined NGINX as a technical marketing engineer back in 2017 and been doing that ever since. And just recently made the move to solutions engineering for modern apps.
That's going to be a great role for you, getting this kind of information out in front of customers. And what you've put together in this book, I think, is probably going to be a majority of the conversations that you're going to have in your new role. So it probably helps you that you made this book and then
For
get to,
sure. Yeah, it's a good reference.
yeah, you can go ahead and have meetings with folks and then say, hey, and by the way, here's your follow-up material, my book. That's
Or while they're trying to figure out a solution, going through the book as a reference to fix that.
This book is, well, first question I'm going to ask you. This book is 124 pages long. How how long did it take for you to write this book?
It was a lot of work. Um, I give a lot of respect to authors now, and because I know what they have to go through. So it actually took me about like 3 to 4 months. A lot of the work is getting it approved by other subject matter experts and getting feedback, and a lot of the work went into editing as well. Making sure that the content is as recent as possible, so that when we release the book, we don't have to make changes to it as technology
Mm.
changes. Over the months. So it took me about 3 to 4 months to write it, and then getting it approved at the same time by subject matter experts, getting their feedback, and then getting it edited. And of course, making sure that the GitHub repository that comes with the book, all the code in the GitHub repos are working fine, so that when readers actually go through the examples, it's working and everything's working fine. So making sure that everything is accurate and making sure that the new product releases are aligned with the content from the book it was a challenge. And so a lot of it was coordination, and it took a team of 4 to 5 people to get it done. But at the end of the day, it was worth it. It really is a great book. Anybody that is practicing Kubernetes, I recommend they download the book.
Okay, so let's talk about that as an intro to the book itself. Maybe you can talk about what this book is going to cover and what type of person wants to read this book.
Sure. So the book consists of 4 chapters. The first chapter is about getting started with Nginx, how to install Nginx, Ingress Controller, and Service Mesh in a Kubernetes environment. And there are many methods to do so. And then the second chapter, it kind of talks about traffic management. So how do you actually route the traffic? How do you actually manage which traffic goes where, which traffic goes to which services, etc., to kind of maneuver your way around a dynamic microservices environment, especially when you're pushing changes, 5 to 10 times per day. The traffic management is going to really help you there. And then the third chapter, we get into monitoring and visibility, which is really, really important, obviously. So we get into how you can actually integrate Nginx systems, which are typically at the core of your Kubernetes environment, and how you can actually export that data to many third-party providers, including AWS CloudWatch, the ELK stack, Prometheus, Grafana, so all that great stuff there. And then finally, the last chapter, which I think is a really very, very important chapter, we step into security. And so security, we cover identity and WAF, so how you can actually implement, single sign-on solutions, and how to integrate your single sign-on solutions with Okta, Ping Identity, and Azure AD, as well as how you can actually apply WAF policies at the Ingress controller system to protect your apps from malicious attacks. So that's the last chapter. And so, given those chapters I was just talking about, it really covers a wide range of skill level
Mm.
for Kubernetes practitioners. Like you could be a beginner and start reading the book, and you'll learn a lot, right? And then for a more advanced user, maybe you can skip the first chapter and dig jump in straight into chapter 2, chapter 3, and 4.
Mm.
So this book is really for any Kubernetes practitioner, obviously, like who actually deploys Kubernetes in their environment hands-on, and they want to actually get started with it. So that's the great news there. And on top of that, there's a GitHub repository. So you can actually deploy all the examples in the ebook and get started right away.
You mentioned for an advanced user, they're already going, and maybe for that beginner user, they are potentially reading the entire thing. Do they already have to have a certain flavor of Kubernetes up and running to get started with the book and examples?
Yes. So the prerequisite, and I think this was included in the book. So the prerequisite is you having a working Kubernetes environment. That's all you really need. And so we try to make this book as agnostic as possible. Like we don't like to make this book specifically for Kubernetes on a specific cloud, right? Like this book is for Kubernetes anywhere, whether it's on EKS, AKS, AWS, GCP, right? It doesn't really matter. Even on-prem, right? If you're running something on-prem, we show you how to do that as well. If you're running Kubernetes bare metal on-prem, so that's really the only requirement. And it's a lot easier in the cloud, obviously, because they have Kubernetes managed services to make that happen uh, as easy as possible. But it doesn't have to be in the cloud.
That's
Yeah.
awesome too. So it covers everything for everybody. Great use cases. I'll ask you this, what are kind of the typical challenges that you think a Kubernetes administrator is running across that they definitely should read this book to overcome?
So I think the Kubernetes has its many benefits, but the problem with it is a lot of the application logic is moving over to the Kubernetes networking, which means that the provisioning of the Kubernetes networking is more and more important in the Kubernetes environment. And so having to move the application logic into the networking is a challenge. And the way you actually configure the networking in Kubernetes is via APIs. And so we have all these different objects that we define in order to actually configure that networking. And so this is why we have vendor-specific APIs, like our custom resource definitions. And then we have ingress resources, which are kind of limited, which is why now Google is pushing out the Gateway API to kind of overcome these challenges and push multi-tenancy, for example, when you want to scale out, which is also covered in the book as well. So that's the challenge. It's more about taking control of the Kubernetes networking to really optimize your applications in Kubernetes. And then actually when you scale out, you run into more problems. So that's when you start thinking about multi-tenancy and that kind of stuff. So one big problem is the Kubernetes networking, the complexity of the Kubernetes networking, and so how you can actually leverage that. And so we use NGINX as a data plane to take control of that. And then another challenge is actually breaking down the applications into many sub-distributed applications. That could be a challenge in itself, where companies are kind of struggling to move from a monolithic environment, and breaking down those apps into smaller applications and managing those in Kubernetes can be very, very challenging. And you need a solid methodology to actually make it work for you. Otherwise, it's gonna cause a lot of problems, and you have to make sure you're ready. So the book helps you get ready. That's what the book's all about. It helps you get ready for that. So that's, I would say, the two biggest challenges.
Do you see people like figuring out this challenge after the fact? Like they've already deployed their Kubernetes, they have everything in production, and then they start running into issues with the networking, the observability, and then they kind of go back and revisit this and have to figure out how they re-architect with something like NGINX?
I think that's typically what a practitioner goes through. It's more like as they're going through the journey and they're actually deploying everything, they say, "Oh my God, like there's so many things I'm running into. Like what is this, right? Like it's so challenging. Like I'm running into all these barriers, right?" So I think they're optimistic, and they're thinking at first, okay, well, this is great, Kubernetes. I can't wait to get going. But as they start building their architecture, that's when they start running into the problems and the challenges. So
Yeah.
it's all about having the right tools. And a great tool is obviously NGINX as a data plane to help you help you get through that journey.
I
Yeah.
mean, it sounds like this book is for everyone. So whether you are a beginner or you're an experienced practitioner, and whether you are just starting to deploy Kubernetes into production or dev test, or you already have Kubernetes in production and you've started to run into these challenges, this book kind of applies to everyone.
Yeah, I think the only thing I would say is before reading the book, right? Just learn about basic Kubernetes knowledge, right? Like what's a service, what's a pod, what's a deployment. Just learning about the very basics. Watching tutorials online about Kubernetes, just very fundamental concepts there, and then you would understand the book a lot better if you did that. So At
Cool.
least having a base knowledge experience with Kubernetes would help you a lot.
And then, you've been mentioning the GitHub repository as well. So there's the ebook and there's the GitHub repository. Do you need to have read the ebook in order to make sense of the repo, or can you just look at the repo and kind of get an idea of what's going on?
No, so it's actually in the README file of the GitHub. So in order to read the instructions on how to use the code in the GitHub, you need to read the book.
Okay, cool.
So it's you read the book, and then as you follow along in the book, you work with the repository, and the book tells you how to deploy the code, and it explains, what to deploy when and what does this code do, like stuff like that. So the book is basically the documentation on how to use the GitHub repo.
Oh, perfect. Okay,
That's
cool.
essentially it. Yeah.
So what we'll do then, this is great, Amir, and thanks for joining me today. What we'll do is we're going to there is a link for the page that you go and download the ebook. So we'll include that down below. There's the GitHub repo. We'll include that, but obviously warn people that, and it's in the README, that you have to go check out the book in order to understand what you're doing with the repo anyways. So you can kind of skim it, but for the full instructions, you'll head over to that. Otherwise, any parting words or any last tip for folks that are getting into Kubernetes?
Don't be discouraged.
Yeah.
There's a lot of complexity with Kubernetes, and it is a beast. I'll tell you that. There's a lot of complexities there, and that's why we're here. We're here to help people build awesome applications. And if you know how to leverage it, if you know how to go through those challenging waters, I'd say it's definitely worth it. There's a lot of applications out there where they best reside, where they belong in a Kubernetes environment, right? And at the same time, there are other applications that don't belong in a Kubernetes environment. Really, it's really going to come down to first the performance and the scale, and you got to think about, when you scale out, is your operating expense going to go up, right? You got to measure your profit margins properly. So in Kubernetes, that could be very beneficial, especially when you're leveraging multi-tenancy, for example. Definitely check out NGINX. It's going to help you through the complexity as you're deploying applications in distributed environments. So that's all I would say. Don't get discouraged from the complexity. But if you think that it's from this point forward, it's not worth deploying or moving forward with Kubernetes, then that may be the case, right? Kubernetes is not a one-size-fits-all approach at the end of the day.
It's okay to say no.
It's okay to say no. Be honest with yourself. If Kubernetes is not the thing, then it's not the thing.
And I love that NGINX provides a ton of resources. This book, and there's a community Slack channels as well that people can join. So lots of ways to get support for this kind of stuff. All right, Amir, thanks a lot for joining me today. It was great to chat with you. Good luck in your new role as well. And I'm sure we'll be talking again in the future.
Thank you, sir. For sure.